or indeed anybody who's having audio issues. The slide deck will be available too, I believe, from Adrian.
Yep, that's right.
Fantastic. So Jeanette says, yes, he did build the team. We did some meditation and molding clay sessions together. Wow, that's great. I've not heard of molding clay sessions together. No. I did have somebody approach me quite a few years ago wanting to do meditation sessions in Adobe Connect, which sort of blew my mind, really, to sit quietly, having a video of other people sitting quietly. It wasn't something I'd immediately thought of, but it worked well and they enjoyed it. So modeling clay, that's great, actually. I wonder if people would pause their videos to, if their modeling was going slightly wrong, if they're using a wheel or something of that nature. Okay, so we have 2 more minutes to go before session goes live. I'm actually going to move us forward to Adrian's slides because I know he has a question to pose to you.
Yeah, this is kind of a spot prize, really. It's something that occurred to me beforehand, which is we can have a caption competition we can run during the duration of this. If you like to come up with some great ideas about what this young lady might be thinking about the presentation that she's getting. There isn't a right or wrong answer. I just thought it might be quite a fun thing to do. There may well be people at the event who have had things run through their mind like running through hers.
Certainly a quizzical expression she has on her face. It does make me wonder exactly what is she thinking.
Oh, that's a good one, Donald. Like that.
Just reading it too. Yes, I think that's perfect. I wonder if he's showing on a laptop screen. These are the safe distancing rules, which don't apply to me, obviously. So once again, welcome to the session. We will be going live with the presentation shortly. We'll just wait for any more people to arrive. We currently got just about 100 people in here. Yes, Juliet. Very good. Exactly. I'm not quite sure what that slide or that diagram or that roadmap is supposed to do to help me buy the right technology or the right services. And Tess, yes, Zoom yoga. It's really amazing. My daughter, my eldest, is a yoga instructor as well as working for another organisation, and she's been doing some online sessions, and I have to say they've been really well received. But also to do with well-being and not just yoga, but I think yoga and well-being can be mixed together. But I hope you enjoyed the experience. Lizzie, yes, I think we will be showing contact details later on. Adrian, do you have a Twitter handle?
I do, but you're going to ask what it is now, aren't you? And I'm not sure I can remember offhand with any reliability. I find Twitter the most infuriating medium, I have to say. I love LinkedIn. I don't use Facebook much, but Twitter just maybe it's one of those. Maybe it's my age, but I've never really taken to it. But I will share it when I can remember it.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I'm going to go off camera now so that you can focus on Adrian and the things he has to say, and I will talk to you closer to the end. Over to you, Adrian.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to my lounge, which is it's not often you get to welcome this number of people into your lounge. So thank you for coming. Essentially, the inspiration behind this event came about because I've been in this industry, if you want to call it an industry, for a long time. So when I started out in the world of what was then computer-based training, the bandwidth squeeze was the 1.44 megabyte floppy disk, believe it or not. So entire projects were delivered on a stack of 1.44 megabyte floppy disks held together with an elastic band in 93, 94. And the world of buying and selling was a great deal more simple. And over the intervening 25 plus years, it's become a very, very vibrant, very exciting, but at the same time, very confusing industry. I've seen millions made, I've seen millions lost for a whole range of different technologies and players which have come and gone over the years. And in that process, I've learned a lot of things they don't teach you at Harvard Business School. They don't teach you on Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply courses. And they don't actually teach L&D professionals for a range of reasons. I'm going to share some of those today. The whole topic of buying learning solutions is something we probably don't talk enough about. There's an awful lot of time spent arguing the merits of different learning solutions, but there isn't that much going on in terms of providing development for people in how to make great choices for themselves and for their organization. So essentially, this session is all about value. Value as opposed to price, but the two things are obviously linked. And it's also about a long-established legal principle, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. In other words, it's the buyer's responsibility to look after his or her interests and to make sure what they buy is what they need. And that's easier said than done when it comes to modern learning technology, which exists in a bewildering array of forms and actually is being innovated so fast that it's very hard to keep up with. Even if you attend events like the Summer Forum and Learning Technologies, as I strongly recommend you do, things happen in between. So I thought as a starting point, it'd be helpful to kind of explore the markets, with apologies for those in the insurance industry. I thought it'd be helpful to explore the market, not compare it, but explore it, and just give you some milestones you can use really in terms of your own journey towards purchasing what it is you need. It's not always the case that people get to start with a clean sheet of paper. And so I guess a lot of people who will be attending this session will already work for organizations with their existing supply chain of learning technology, learning solutions, learning services vendors. Today's session is very much about learning technologies. It's a vast subject all to itself. And if we were to get into buying learning and learning services, training, coaching, and all the rest, we'd be here for a lot longer than 45 minutes. But as a starting point, I think the most helpful thing you can do is start to look at your supply chain and to begin to categorize them into different buckets to understand what they are best at and what's most important to them. I think most people on the call will reflect and understand the difference between business-to-business vendors and business-to-consumer vendors. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to classify the difference in the world of learning technology and learning software, because there are some propositions which are available to individuals and they're also available to organizations. In broad terms, companies with a business-to-business ethos go about their business development activity very differently from those of the business-to-consumer or catalog type ethos. So business-to-business businesses will typically train their business development teams in something called value-based selling. Value-based selling, spin selling is sometimes called, or solution selling, consultative selling. So their approach will reflect the fact that your organization, which might seem simple from the inside, is actually infernally difficult to understand and sell to from the outside. So their focus is going to be very much about you understanding your organization, the different business units, the competing demands from operational business units, from HR, from IS, from cyber assurance, from all the different stakeholders. They all have a say in whether or not something new gets procured. So their focus is really about uncovering pain for you. And if it's being done really well, you'll never spot it, because what they're doing essentially is asking really good open questions and getting you to explain very clearly what your challenges are. On the other hand, business to consumer type companies would tend to have a very established product set, a catalog, a tariff, a price, limited customization, and they will be primarily talking about the features of their product. And it's really a case of like it or lump it. It's a product, you buy it off the shelf, you might get some discounts for volume, but essentially the proposition doesn't change. It's worthwhile thinking about those types of organisation and categorising your suppliers into those two groups. Apologies to anyone who's on the call who is very familiar with procurement of information technology solutions. Not everybody is, and it's certainly not part of the curriculum for things like CIPD training qualifications or the TAP program or other things that you actually need to understand these things. But it's worth understanding the role of the supplier in the value chain, because what they're able to do for you in terms of value and flexibility will depend who they are. The first group of people are product originators or owners. So these are people who've developed a piece of technology, a piece of software, platform, whatever it is, and they own it and they're selling it. So clearly, as their product scales, they have an increasing amount of flexibility in terms of the terms they offer, the prices they charge. But it's not always possible for them to take a product to market directly, and it's not always possible for you to deal with them. So some of these vendors in a global market could be in any country around the world you care to name, which is the reason why there are other kinds of distributors out there. A commercial agent, for example, would be somebody who's in business on their own account, but is actually selling the product, the learning technology product or service, on behalf of the originator. So the paperwork the deal is done on will be the product originator's paperwork, the payments will go to them, and a commission will be paid to the commercial agent. Clearly, there are quite a large number of these around, but they don't necessarily identify themselves as commercial agents. They are caught in Europe by something called the commercial agents regulations, which have implications for them. I won't go into it today, but clearly, if you can deal directly with a product originator owner and they're not having to pay a commission to a commercial agent, that may give you more flexibility in terms of your negotiation. Publishers are slightly different. So a publisher would be an organization who might deal with a number of product originators and owners, and they essentially have a master copy of the software. And what they'll do is they'll then replicate, duplicate, and sell it. And they'll be paid, they'll pay the end user, they'll get money from the end user and pay the product originator a royalty. Again, their business model is their business model. They're usually aggregators, so they may have a number of different products from different vendors on their books, sometimes in the original brand identity and sometimes in their own brand identity, so you never know it's actually a product owned by somebody else. But again, if you want to negotiate with a publisher, if the original originator isn't available in the market, you've pretty much got to do business on their terms. You'll also see the phrase original equipment manufacturer bandied about. It's a bit of a misnomer in this industry, in the learning and development services space, the learning technology space, because OEMs aren't necessarily the manufacturer of everything that they sell. So they'll typically bundle together servers, equipment, tablets, software, whatever it is, and then they'll market it under their own brand. But they're really putting together different products. Now, it is possible in some cases you can source something that they're selling under their own brand in the originator's branding, its original format. So again, you get a bit more flexibility if you can do that, but normally the way these things are written, it's very hard to get access, particularly in given territories, if the OEM has a monopoly. The next group would be a reseller, so a software reseller. So in that instance, what's happening is the originator is selling the product lock, stock and barrel to the reseller or distributor, with the benefit of a volume discount. So the reseller will actually commit to buy a specific volume a year to discount, and they'll then sell on that product to you as licenses or seats or whatever you want to call it. So reseller, very common model. Again, limited flexibility if you're dealing with a reseller because of all of the above I've already mentioned. they're tied down to a volume and a volume discount, and that's strictly limited by the agreement they have with the originator. And then finally, you have the value-added reseller, which is a slightly harder concept to get your head around. A value-added reseller would bundle products together and then sell them with added value. So two complementary applications that are from different vendors that they put together, put a brand on it, and then resell it. So it's got a packager, if you like. So these are really good questions to ask your suppliers. What exactly is their business model? Because that will tell you a great deal about their ability to offer you discounts, preferential arrangements of various sorts. And it'll also tell them that you understand how this market. Just saw a question come up from Ollie. VAR and OEM sound similar. They are similar. In most cases, a VAR isn't dealing with equipment as such. So an OEM classically would be someone like, I don't know, a manufacturer, Dell, I guess, who will put together a laptop like the one I'm using right now, and they've got within there a number of sort of software products which are sold under their name, but they're actually originated by somebody else. So whereas a value-added reseller would be potentially doing something different and maybe not involving equipment as such, which is what the E in OEM stands for. Hope that's some help. Right, so that's the kind of landscape of different business models that are worth exploring. You've also got the complication of software distribution models. So back in 1994, the software distribution model was a 1.44 megabyte floppy disk, which I should have to hand actually, so I can show you what one actually looks like, and a rubber band. Today, we've got three broad options, which I guess most people on the call will be familiar with. There are, I suppose the increasing trend is towards software as a service or cloud hosting, the central option, where vendors effectively run the whole delivery operation via intermediaries like AWS or Azure or any of a large number of different types of hosting company. But there are still vendors who operate on an on-premises basis, and there are still clients in the defense industry. Ollie, I know, works in the defense industry, who will insist on having their software only available on premises. So it's worth segmenting your supply base if they've got particular red lines around whether they make their product available on premises or on the cloud. There are lots of pros and cons we can go into in a minute. There's also a hybrid option, and that's worth exploring sometimes because some clients will die in a ditch over having on-premises. It's got to be an on-premises solution. But actually, there are situations where you might want to go for a hybrid option. Those things that aren't sensitive, that don't involve personal data or company IP or trade secrets, secret source, you're content to leave running out as a software as a service application and running through some kind of open standard, XAPI or SCORM. The more sensitive data is retained internally. It's worth exploring. It might be worthwhile harvesting the expertise of people on the call. So we'll just turn to do a quick poll. Has anyone got any? We'll take a couple of minutes. If anyone's got any sort of key learning points or considerations to bear in mind about those different models, and I think you should consider carefully before opting for an on-premises, cloud, or possibly hybrid approach. I can see multiple attendees are typing, so can't wait to see what you're going to say. Yes, you're right, James. It does require your own kit people to run the software and support it. Yeah. So on premises, it's attractive, but you need to really think about your whole life cost of ownership, as Giles says. Just because you have lots of people who are currently maintaining on-premises hardware, software, infrastructure, do you necessarily want to continue doing that for the lifetime of any contract you're entering into? And what is that cost if you have an exit point from your existing contract? Great point from Andy Wooler there, and he's got huge experience at places like Hitachi, Vantara, and other organisations, Robinson Alliance. Yeah, it's easy to miss upgrades. It's nice to have a vendor look after the application of your updates for you in a controlled way. And that's also a challenge in itself for the vendor, because they may have clients on 18 different instances of the same software around the world. Sooner or later, they've got to rationalize that, call it a day, and so they're not going to support it anymore. A bit like has happened with Flash, or is happening with Flash this year. Yeah, Robin's point, versioning, absolutely key. Cloud, I think Travis says lots of security concerns for the company. I get that, and I think it's right to be concerned. I've been working with clients over the last couple of years, very big retail banks, and they spend huge amounts of time worrying about security, and rightly so, particularly if it impacts their core systems, or if it involves, in Europe particularly, people getting access to their personnel data. 4% of global profits is a sobering thing to think about when you're considering data security. Steve Milson makes a good point, that vendors are pushing more and more towards cloud only. That brings you economies of scale, which is value as far as you're concerned. And actually, because of the scalable nature of it, sometimes the true cost to the SaaS owners can be surprisingly low. And that could be passed directly to the bottom line. Okay, and then in terms of the hybrid, it's interesting. Travis says we use this a lot. Purchase it, but host internally. Travis says, and using company cloud services to push the content. Yes, you could end up with the worst of both worlds, as James Booth says. So just be careful. Just be careful. But certainly, it's worthwhile bracketing your supply chain using those criteria, because that's essentially it's a given. It's a red line for some vendors. If you ask a SaaS vendor to host internally, or even do, in some instances, a hybrid, if they haven't got the right interface technology, it could be a no-no. Anyway, we've got to move on because we've got a vast amount to talk about. So we'll move on to our next slide and take it from there. Thanks for your contribution there. I mean, there's a huge amount of expertise in the room, so it'd be a great shame to waste that. So having worked out what kind of vendor they are and where they fit in terms of those business models and technology go-to-market offerings, you need to really work out what part of the market they play in. I don't know how many people on the call have looked at the recent Fosway 9-grid, the Gartner Magic Quadrant, the Bursin report. It's infernally complicated. And somehow when you look at those analysts' reports, it seems almost more complicated than it needs to be. So I spent a bit of time before the session thinking, how could I try and take something infernally complicated and have a stab at making it a bit simpler? And the way I've chosen to do it is to create a tube map. Not nearly as good as the original tube map, which is a work of genius, but it goes some way, hopefully, to showing you what the key landscape features are. So I'm going to go full screen when we do this, so don't panic. When we arrive on the platform and mind the gap, I will take it back to normal size afterwards. Bang. So this is my kind of interpretation of a tube map, just so I can show you broadly around the landscape. We're already on that map actually, in that we're in the communication and collaborations platform environment here. So as you can see, we're actually in Adobe Connect here. If we head back to the terminus, which is platforms, you can see a lot of very familiar consumer platforms up here. So service platforms like Just Eat and Uber Eats, asset sharing platforms, social platforms. And of course, when you think about the range of media tools that employees interface with, this is part of their wider landscape. So I try to take a kind of wider view of platforms from that point of view. And platforms are very much what makes investors excited. So you'll continue to see a proliferation of these as people try to seize different corners of the market. Some of these applications have dual purpose. So some of them are media and content platforms that potentially have learning applications as well as communication and advertising applications. You've also got learning content platforms, which are variants of the aggregation model we were talking about a little bit earlier on. So Coursera, Udacity, FutureLearn, all these are examples. All brands named are examples only. We've also got search platforms, and within those you've got innovative little options like Anders Pink, which is a filtered adaptive model which will allow you to look for particular things in terms of learning content which are relevant to your job role. We have development platforms, and again, from a kind of a broad brush viewpoint, a helicopter view, we've got games development platforms, which might be relevant these days if you're taking first steps into virtual reality and augmented reality. We've got learning content development platforms, which broadly categorize into non-adaptive and adaptive. We have controlled platforms and app stores, and this is generally how members of the public and employees will access content, because learning technology is a subset of the consumer technology market. So in many cases, what we're doing is leveraging billions of dollars of investment made by others in those access technologies. I've also created this other category over here, which is resource planning and management platforms, which I've chosen to separate out into human resource management platforms and to operations and finance platforms. Essentially, the idea behind this is that these are platforms which are used in one way or another to actually manage human resources. So engagement surveys, recruitment management, compensation and benefits, talent and succession management, competence and performance management. I think Andy Wooler, when he looks at this, will go, Adrian, this is a huge simplification. Yes, it is. And also, of course, what you have complicating this entire picture is the notion of suites. So it's very hard to actually compartmentalize a vendor into any one of these categories. So someone like Workday, for example, will play as an HR platform. They'll play with the Workday learning solution in here. SAP play as success factors in the learning management space. They've got modules that cover all of this, and they also cover the finance platforms down here. So it's a very vibrant and complex landscape. But I think, again, if you take a look at your supply base, you can begin to see roughly what part of the line they are in, and hopefully you can also work out roughly where it is they're heading. I think it's an interesting model, this, and I will be revisiting this, adding in hyperlinks, adding in much more comprehensive listings for the different vendors. So this slide's available in the slide deck from today. If you want to email me after the session, I'll put together a mailing list and I'll update you with future versions of this as time goes by. So there's my whistle-stop tour of the underground network that is the learning technology space. So moving on, returning to the caveat emptor question, what do I mean by lies, damn lies and statistics? It's a very vibrant marketplace. It's a global marketplace. It's a complex marketplace. The health warning, caveat emptor, we talked about it before. You need to be aware that there are a huge number of neuromyths. There's a huge amount of new research that's being done continually into things like learning effectiveness. And it's very easy for these to be recycled and repeated in good faith or in bad. So if a vendor is making claims, it makes good sense to follow a couple of quick ground rules to validate what it is they're saying to you. The first thing to be said for a UK audience is that here in the UK, marketing communication is regulated by the Advertising Standards Authority. In other words, if I put something on my website or in a brochure or in an email shot, and I can't substantiate it through objective research, or if there's a significant difference of opinion amongst scientists about it, then I can't make a statement of fact about it. So here in the UK, we're very used to putting quite a high level of reliance on advertising statements. But that's not true globally. Advertising isn't regulated the same way. And I've spoken to vendors who've more or less said to me, you know what, I can say it, somebody else has said it, I'm going to quote them saying it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And unfortunately, that's the case. Case in point, let's do a little poll. So this will be fairly quick. I like to just vote in this poll one option as to which of these learning activities are most effective. Okay. Quite a lot of engagement going on there, which is great to see. Okay, I think everybody's voted. Of course, Steve said depends what kind of learner you are. There's method to my madness. I think the key point is if you look at those actual statistics, none of them round, with the exception of participating hands-on workshops, none of them round to exactly a given percentage. But what you see amongst vendors is essentially a range of myths that do. So this is probably the archetype. I noticed that only today people were posting this piece of misinformation, Edgar Dale's cone of experience. It seems subjectively very likely to be true, but it's not. It's based on a myth. And as Andy says, most things in a triangle have been debunked. I think Maslow, was another one which came in for a bit of a kicking today on LinkedIn. So this is one example of a myth that is extremely prevalent and is used many, many times by vendors to substantiate different types of claim. So the first thing is, if a vendor is saying to you, my solution is X, Y% better, and it rounds to an exact figure like that, they're really asking you to ask the question, well, that's really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. Can you peer reviewed research which proves that that's the case? And if they can't, that tells you things about the people you're dealing with as an organization and possibly the individual. This is an example. If you go to the Learning Accelerators website, you'll see on my blog a number of instances where I've picked up organizations and called them out over claims that they were making. This actually came from a London-based vendor who was essentially knocking copy. So this is, one of the tactics you'll see used. Most salespeople understand that their biggest competitor is the status quo. Doing nothing is quite often appealing because it doesn't involve much action. Might not cost you any more or any less than your current arrangements. So in this instance, the vendor is saying that essentially all the investment globally, Oxford University, Cambridge, pretty well all schools are wasting their time. If they moved everything over to VR, it would be hugely more effective. It's a myth. It's a myth based on a variant of the Edgar Dale cone of experience. Similarly, these claims, that's another warning sign. A claim which seems too good to be true, paired with a reputable brand. So IBM say that this is the case. again, if you look at my blog, you'll find the true story behind that statistic, which goes back, well, over 25 years to a study that was done in 2000. And it wasn't actually a study, it was actually something done by investors who were hyping, amongst other things, a company called Digital Think, who I worked for at the time in 2000. Anyway, that's moving on. Yeah, this is another common myth. The Research Institute of America. If you take a look at at my blog, you'll see it took me an awfully long time to get to the root cause of this. Again, all of these statistics date back to the 50s and 60s. They're nothing to do with e-learning in any way, shape, or form. Actually, this one is actually 90s, probably mid-90s. So the ugly truth is that actually there's very little peer-reviewed research to show that any one method of learning is significantly more effective than another. So if a vendor is telling you that their learning solution is a factor better than face-to-face learning, then that should send out some real alarm bells. If you take a look at the debtor database, the no significant difference database, you'll see what I mean. Where all variables are held equal, there is no difference in effectiveness between one media over another, certainly nothing transformational. So it's got to be a red flag, I think, if you see somebody saying that. And if you do, and they're in the UK, then talk to the Advertising Standards Authority, should you feel minded, because it's not fair to people who are playing by the rules to have other people who aren't. This is a concept most people are familiar with, the difference between value and price. A value-based selling trained salesman will want to genuinely highlight the value we'll get from their product. They won't necessarily try to talk about the price. And that's not a bad thing. I think really as a client, you need to do the same. Here's another one of my tricky little questions. Another poll, if you like. It's time for a poll. Where does learning actually take place? Wow, look at that. 95.6. 92. Yeah, so what we're seeing is overwhelming support for the in the workplace. I'm sure the 80-20-10 Institute and potentially those vendors investing in learning in the flow at work will be very pleased with that. But moving on in the interest of time, I've actually neglected to show another option. Actually, learning doesn't happen in the classroom, in the workplace, online. It happens between your ears. And what I mean by that is learning is an internal process. It's a point that's been made very, very well and very cogently by Don in the past. Essentially, learning is an intangible. You can buy quantitative inputs. So you can put your procurement people on buying durations of course development, numbers of courses. You can haggle over day rates for trainers. You can haggle over seats on courses. You can haggle over certifications as a proxy for learning. But true value only flows from the application expressed through objective measures of performance, which is the reason why it's absolutely crucial that your L&D team and your procurement team work in tandem. Because you have to be looking both at the value and the whole life cost of ownership of whatever that solution is. And that would include abstraction from the workplace. So if the actual solution is on paper cheaper but involves abstracting people from work for longer, then you really need to start costing that, because that has a real impact, especially as organizations are increasingly right-sized. So on the home straight now, I'm trying to rush so we get a bit of time for questions at the end. Plugging the gaps, how do you stop value leaking? Well, the approach I often take is to say, well, look, if you choose a learning solution which is inefficient by some degree, then at least the payload will get through. Value will trickle through. The worst scenario is if you have a misaligned solution. Because if you aren't doing robust root cause analysis to identify you have a performance issue that boils down to a knowledge, skills, or attitudes problem, if it actually relates to the environment, tools, some other factor, then 100% of your investment is wasted. So the best way to avoid value leaking is through alignment with genuine business problems and delivering them efficiently. Because, as we've already established, learning formats that are different aren't necessarily transformationally effective. So the actual value comes from efficiency and economy. And that's a very important thing to bear in mind. I characterize the learning journey as a railway line with a terminus at the end. You're either at the terminus or you're not yet there yet. So it's all about getting you to that terminus. But there isn't anything beyond the terminus. There isn't proficient plus 1. In a binary system, there's only 0 and 1. So that's the reason why no learning solution is more effective than any others in a sustainably provable way, because it's essentially a binary outcome. So the key thing is to actually work towards operational efficiency and drive value through liberating time that will be wasted through employees doing things they don't need to, developing learning solutions which are more expensive than they need to be. So that's something, by and large, procurement people are quite good at, providing the L&D people are able to give them good, cogent advice and understand where procurement colleagues are coming from. Finally, in terms of buying, here's my plea. If you're putting together a request for expressions of interest or an RFP, state your requirement in very clear terms that are about what it is you want to achieve, rather than the means you want to use to achieve them. And balance the need for change very clearly in your mind. Sales and marketing professionals are trained to disrupt your confidence in the status quo. It's very rare that people require additional support with maintaining the status quo, but just think carefully about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and retaining those things which deliver benefits for you as they currently are. And specify the benefits you want and not the features you think you need. I could go on to give you some examples, but unfortunately, in a session of this length, it's simply not practical. But that's what would be my plea. Good vendors will rise to the challenge. If you say that you want to be able to do this, that, or the other in terms of managing the learning of your employees or in terms of learning objectives, they'll come up with some brilliant ways to do it, and you'll get a very inclusive approach. So do an expression of interest request first, say what it is you want, and then, only then, begin to refine down to an RFP, which sets out the features you want and the platforms you believe you need. That's it. So I've steered us home with 5 minutes to spare. It's an awful lot to cover, so I'm sorry it's taken so long.
Thank you, Adrian. That was really enjoyable. I enjoyed that a lot. Obviously, I've rehearsed that with Adrian, so my learning was on the first rehearsal. But it was certainly a reminder to me not to forget the core things and to not simply just believe everybody with all of these new technologies which come out, etc., and the new ways of doing things, whether it's cloud, on-premise, Zoom, whatever, that it's all promises until you've got some value being delivered from it. And people can promise you the earth, doesn't mean to say you're going to be able to grasp hold of it in the way they suggest. So I'm just looking for questions. We have 4 or 5 minutes left now. So if there are any questions for Adrian, we'd love to hear them. I can see that Robin's typing away. Yes, Andy, I agree. There are an awful lot of Emperor's new clothes, and everybody wants to tell you their clothes are definitely the ones made of gold.
Yeah, I mean, I've sat in pretty much every seat in the Field of Dreams, or Theatre of Dreams, maybe, that is the learning technology space. And every few years, a new solution comes along. And makes huge claims, usually of unparalleled effectiveness, which then prove to be unfounded. A couple of questions. Travis Groom, there are lots of SaaS out there. Do you have any recommendations that have blown you away? well, SaaS is a very large category. I don't think I can be drawn on that. I think that I think my tip in general is that we're about to go through a major explosion in relation to the movement of linear learning content into non-linear content, and that SaaS platforms that do that can be absolutely transformative. I mean, they can do what the Flying Shuttle did for the Weaver. Essentially, they can release people to work much more quickly because they acknowledge the fact people already know things. Robin Chowdhury, any checklists or thoughts on getting what is out of the box, plain vanilla, versus the bells or whistles? Well, I think most vendors will be quite clear about telling you what's in the box. I think if you start by saying what is it you want to do without talking about technology, if you just say what business benefit do I want, and express this in really plain terms, do an expression of interest and let the vendors do the hard work, and they'll relish that. They'll relish the opportunity to come up with ways in which their platform could be used. And so you're not being framed by the analyst's thinking, and you're not also being pushed into a situation where you're feeling you've got to put together a checklist from some subsector of the Fosway grid, because really that's not really relevant. What's important is what is it you actually want to do as an organization. David, people are talking about AI. Is this a realistic way to identify learning needs? Got to declare an interest here. One of the hats I wear is as a director of learning solutions for Area 9 Rhapsode. So I essentially put your filter up at this point, bearing in mind what I was saying earlier on. But I genuinely believe genuine AI-driven adaptive content is a very powerful tool. Can't really say much more than that, and we've only got a minute to run. Any last questions? The Debunker Club, I've just seen pushed up. That's a very good point. Will Talheimer is brilliant. Will Talheimer is a key member of the Debunker Club. I wish I could join, I just haven't got the time. Thank you.
Certainly a new one for me, and I should be having a look at that later. So I'd just like to draw your attention to the faster download box, which is Adrian's slides, which includes the wonderful diagram which we went full screen on. You can click on the name of the file in that box, and the download files option will become available to you. When you click on that, it will open up a link to download it in your browser. So you will get the opportunity to do that later. Travis would like to know what your blog address is, please, Adrian.
If you go to learningaccelerators.com and then just click blog. It's on screen now, actually. So if you just go to learningaccelerators.com and then click on the blog. And my email address is there. So if you have specific questions I've not dealt with, feel free to email me.
Okay. So the web address Adrian is referring to is in the slides just above the please ask questions here. So it's learningaccelerators.com. I'd just like to say thank you very much.
On LinkedIn if you wish. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, Adrian. That was really enjoyable. Thank you to the audience. I apologise if you had any audio issues. It was crystal clear for me. So I think some people are having problems with Bluetooth headsets, which is strange, but obviously some issue there. So with that, I'm going to close this recording.